I said, nice tail, as a joke. Now, she's called me her husband for 7 days, reaches its breathtaking climax, as Joshua and Kira stand before hundreds of diplomats at the mutual intention ceremony. What began as accident transforms into choice when both declare their desire to continue their bond, not from obligation, but genuine affection. Their words confirmed by a brilliant violet resonance field that silences all doubters. Joshua Ray was invisible. Not literally, of course, though among the kaleidoscope of alien diplomats crowding Zenthar Prime's grand reception hall, literal invisibility wouldn't have been the strangest ability on display. No, Joshua was invisible in the way that only mid-level technical staff could be, essential enough to be invited to diplomatic functions, yet utterly beneath notice once there. He adjusted his Earth Commonwealth Standard issue formal attire, a navy blue suit with subtle luminescent threading that was supposed to impress alien dignitaries, but mostly made him look like a walking nightclub. The crystal corridors of Zenthar Prime Station hummed with conversation in dozens of languages, most beyond human comprehension, without the translator embedded behind his right ear. Above them, floating gardens drifted in carefully controlled anti-gravity fields, exotic plants from 100 worlds releasing perfumes that mingled in dizzying combinations. Joshua's job was simple: ensure the communications array maintained perfect clarity during these interstellar diplomatic events. One crossed wire, one mistranslated phrase, and treaties could collapse, trade deals could implode, or worse, war could be declared. Not that anyone acknowledged this responsibility. To the assembled ambassadors, high ministers, and exalted dignitaries, he was furniture, background, the equivalent of the person who refilled the water glasses at fancy restaurants. Systems check completed, Joshua muttered to himself, tapping the nearly invisible control panel on his wrist. Neural interface stability at 99.8%. Psychic dampeners functioning within parameters. He allowed himself a small smile. Not bad for his first major assignment off Earth. At 32, Joshua was older than most first-time off-worlders in the diplomatic corps. He'd spent too many years tinkering with Earthbound communications networks before finally applying to the Interstellar Division. His supervisor had been blunt. "You're smart enough, Ray, but you're starting late. Don't expect to climb ranks quickly. Do your job, keep your head down, and maybe in 5 years we'll talk about something more interesting than maintenance." 5 years felt like an eternity when surrounded by the wonders of interstellar society. Joshua watched as a Merskian ambassador, 8 feet tall with iridescent feathers instead of hair, engaged in animated conversation with 3 Juxani representatives whose entire bodies seemed to shift like liquid metal. In another corner, a delegation of crystalline beings communicated entirely through patterns of light reflecting from their faceted limbs. And then he saw her. Even among the exotic assemblage, the Zenthari delegation stood out. Humanoid in general appearance, but with subtle differences that marked them as distinctly non-terrestrial. Iridescent skin with a slight violet undertone, elongated limbs that moved with impossible grace, and most notably, the prehensile tails that served both practical and cultural purposes in their society. The lead delegate, clearly distinguishable by her ceremonial attire of flowing silver fabric and the intricate circlet of glowing blue stones adorning her head, moved through the crowd with practiced diplomacy. Her tail, adorned with delicate silver rings that matched her circlet, swayed behind her with what seemed to Joshua like its own emotional language, assertive during negotiations, relaxed among allies, slightly raised when she was making an important point. Joshua had been briefed on the Zenthari. Of course. Their homeworld was one of the founding members of the Galactic Concordat, their influence spanning multiple star systems. Earth, as a newcomer to interstellar politics, desperately needed Zenthari support for several pending trade agreements. His briefing documents had included a long list of cultural taboos and protocol warnings. most of which he'd skimmed in the exhaustion of pre-mission preparation. What he hadn't expected was for Ambassador Kira, High Matriarch of the Zenthari Diplomatic Conclave, to approach the refreshment table precisely as he was testing the local translator node. She materialized beside him with the silent grace typical of her species, reaching for a crystal flute of some shimmering blue liquid. Joshua froze, suddenly aware of his disheveled appearance after hours of crawling through maintenance ducts to ensure perfect communications. "Systems functioning properly?" she asked in perfect English, her voice melodic with an accent that somehow reminded him of rainfall. Joshua blinked in surprise. "You speak English?" A smile touched her lips, fuller than a human's, with a slight violet tint that matched the subtle hue of her skin. "We Zenthari pride ourselves on mastering the languages of our diplomatic partners. Though I admit, your translator technology is quite impressive for such a young spacefaring species." "Thank you, Joshua's mind raced for an appropriate response. Was he supposed to bow? Address her by title? The protocol briefing swirled uselessly in his memory. "You need not worry about formalities," she said, seeming to read his anxiety. "This is a reception, after all. A time for... what do you humans call it? Breaking the ice?" Joshua relaxed slightly. "Yes, exactly. Though given the Juxani delegation's homeworld average temperature, maybe melting the ice would be more appropriate." Her laughter was unexpected, a genuine sound that drew glances from nearby dignitaries. Joshua noticed her tail swish in what he interpreted as amusement. "A communications specialist with a sense of humor," she observed. "Refreshing. Most technical staff I encounter are too nervous to speak freely." "I'm still nervous," Joshua admitted. "This is my first major off-world assignment. And you drew Zenthar Prime? Impressive." She sipped her drink, studying him with eyes that were almost human, except for their unusual violet color, the same shade as the subtle undertone of her skin. "Our station is typically reserved for experienced diplomatic staff." Joshua shrugged. "I think they needed someone who could integrate the new Earth communications protocols with your psychic resonance fields. It's a niche specialty." "Ah, so you understand our technology as well?" Her tail lifted slightly. "Interest, perhaps." "Enough to keep everything running smoothly," he said. "Though your systems are centuries ahead of ours, I'm learning more than I'm contributing." A subtle chime sounded, and Ambassador Kira glanced toward a gathering of dignitaries at the center of the hall. "It seems the formal introductions are beginning. I must join my delegation." She turned to leave, then paused. "Perhaps we will speak again. Joshua Ray." He hadn't told her his name. The realization that she'd either looked him up or pulled it from the station's identity registers sent a strange thrill through him. As she turned, her tail swished gracefully behind her, the silver rings catching the light. Without thinking, and later, he would blame it on the 3 glasses of alien wine he'd consumed. Joshua grinned and said, "Nice tail." Time seemed to stop. The ambient noise of the reception faded. Nearby conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the soft music playing from hidden speakers seemed to hold its breath. Ambassador Kira turned slowly. Her violet eyes widened. The delegates nearest to them, representatives from at least 6 different worlds, stared in what Joshua could only interpret as shock. "What did you say?" Kira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Joshua's stomach dropped. Had he committed some terrible faux pas? Insulted her? Called her mother a space slug? His mind raced through the cultural briefing he'd skimmed too quickly. I said nice tail," he repeated, his voice rising in question. "It was just a compliment. The silver rings are elegant." He was babbling now, acutely aware of the growing circle of silence expanding around them. For what felt like an eternity, Ambassador Kira stared at him. Then, to his utter confusion, she straightened her posture, raised her tail to a specific angle that seemed significant, and declared in a voice that carried throughout the hall, "I accept your offer of bonding, Joshua Ray of Earth." The silence exploded into a cacophony of voices. Delegates were speaking rapidly in dozens of languages, some moving closer, others backing away. Joshua stood frozen, his translator struggling to keep up with the overlapping conversations. What, bonding?" he managed. A tall, stern-looking Zenthari male stepped forward, his ceremonial attire marking him as part of Kira's delegation. "Matriarch, surely you cannot be serious. This human clearly does not understand." He spoke the words. "Veil," Kira interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "In public gathering, with witnesses. The offer was made and accepted according to our most sacred traditions." "What offer?" Joshua's voice cracked. "I didn't offer anything." A murmur rippled through the crowd. An elderly Zenthari, her skin a deeper violet than Kira's, approached slowly, leaning on an ornate staff. "The human speaks truth. He does not understand our ways. Ignorance of tradition does not negate its power. Ritual judge," Kira responded. "Has it not been our law for 10,000 cycles? Words spoken cannot be unspoken." The elderly Zenthari, apparently some kind of judge, nodded gravely. "This is true, but there is precedent for the trial of intent when outsiders are involved." Joshua found his voice again. "Will someone please tell me what's happening?" A human diplomat, Director Elaine Park, Earth's senior representative, pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of controlled panic. "Ambassador Kira, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. Technical Specialist Ray is not authorized to make any kind of diplomatic arrangements." "This is not diplomacy," Kira interrupted. "This is personal bonding. Your specialist has proposed marriage according to Zenthari custom, and I have accepted." "Marriage?" Joshua squeaked. Director Park turned to him, her expression murderous. "What did you do, Ray?" I said nice tail. It was a compliment." The ritual judge made a sound that might have been a chuckle. Among the Zenthari, to praise another's tale in formal gathering is the traditional first step in proposing lifetime partnership. It dates back to our pre-space era when warriors would admire the strength and dexterity of potential mates. "But I didn't know that," Joshua protested. "Indeed," the judge agreed. "Which is why the trial of intent is appropriate here. 7 days of provisional bonding, after which both parties may affirm or dissolve the connection without dishonor." Director Park stepped closer to Joshua, speaking through clenched teeth. 7 days of pretending to be married to the highest-ranking Zenthari diplomat in the sector. Do you understand the diplomatic implications if this goes poorly?" Before Joshua could respond, another Zenthari pushed forward, taller than the others, with elaborate gold markings on his face and a tail that held itself in what seemed an aggressive posture. "This is outrageous," he declared. "The matriarch cannot bond with an alien technician. The political implications alone. My personal choices are not subject to political approval. Counselor Thurk," Kira cut him off sharply. "Or have you forgotten that separation of bonding rights from governance duties was established in the Great Reform?" Counselor Thurk's face darkened to a deep purple. "The Tyreek faction will not recognize this union." "The Tyreek faction doesn't need to," Kira replied coolly. "They merely need to respect our laws." Joshua felt like he was watching a tennis match played with live grenades. Political factions, laws, what had he stumbled into? The ritual judge tapped her staff on the floor, producing a resonant tone that somehow cut through the chaos. "It is decided. The trial of intent begins now and will conclude in 7 cycles. Preparations will be made." She turned to Joshua, her ancient eyes surprisingly kind. "Young human, you would be wise to learn our ways quickly." As the crowd began to disperse, murmuring excitedly, Director Park grabbed Joshua's arm. "My office, Now.
But I...
Now, Ray, before you accidentally declare war on someone. As Joshua was led away, he caught a final glimpse of Ambassador Kira. To his surprise, she was watching him leave with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Uncertainty, perhaps, or curiosity. And her tail, that elegant appendage that had started this whole mess, curled in what might have been amusement. Joshua had a sinking feeling that the next 7 days would be the longest of his life. Absolutely not. Director Park slammed her hand on her desk, causing the holographic displays to flicker. We'll issue a formal apology, cite cultural misunderstanding, and extract you from this situation immediately. Joshua sat uncomfortably in the chair across from her, feeling like a schoolboy sent to the principal's office. The director's private quarters doubled as her office, a luxury on a space station where every cubic meter was precious. The walls displayed shifting Earth landscapes, currently showing a thunderstorm over the Grand Canyon that matched her mood perfectly. The ritual judge seemed to imply that wouldn't work, Joshua said carefully. Something about words that can't be unspoken? Park sighed, rubbing her temples. The Xanthari take verbal declarations extremely seriously. Their entire legal system is built around the sanctity of the spoken word. It's why they're such reliable treaty partners, and also why we brief every staff member extensively on their cultural taboos. She fixed him with a glare, which you clearly didn't read thoroughly. I read it, Joshua protested. There was nothing about tales being marriage proposals. Page 42, Section 7, Subsection C. Park recited from memory. Compliments regarding physical attributes, particularly species-specific features such as tails, should be avoided in public settings due to their potential intimate connotations. Joshua winced. He definitely skimmed that section. So what happens now? He asked. Now we. Park was interrupted by a chime from her communication system. Yes? The voice of her assistant filled the room. Director, the Xanthari ritual judge and her entourage are requesting entry. Park's expression tightened. Send them in. The door slid open to reveal the elderly judge, accompanied by 2 younger Xanthari in formal attire. They entered with the fluid grace characteristic of their species. Director Park. The judge inclined her head slightly. I am Elder Lyria, first ritual judge of Xanthar Prime. We come to discuss the details of the trial of intent. Park rose to her feet. Judge Lyria, while we respect Xanthari customs, surely you understand that technical specialist Ray spoke in ignorance. On Earth, his comment would be considered merely a casual compliment. We are not on Earth, Lyria replied simply. She turned her gaze to Joshua. The trial of intent exists precisely for situations like this, when words are spoken without full understanding of their weight. It allows both parties to honor the initial declaration while providing an exit without shame, should true compatibility not exist. And what exactly does this trial entail? Joshua asked, finding his voice. Lyria's expression softened slightly. For 7 days, you and Matriarch Kira will fulfill the ceremonial roles of bonded mates. You will attend functions together, participate in certain rituals, and learn about each other's cultures and responsibilities. At the end of this period, either of you may declare the bond dissolved, or you may choose to formalize it permanently. And if we choose to dissolve it, Park asked sharply, then no dishonor falls on either party, Lyria assured her. The provisional nature of the trial is understood by all. Joshua cleared his throat. And my actual job? The communication systems still need maintenance. One of Lyria's companions stepped forward, consulting a translucent tablet. Your work schedule has been adjusted. Priority systems will remain under your care, but secondary maintenance has been reassigned. I don't have authority to approve this, Park said firmly. Lyria's tail flicked once, impatience. Joshua was learning to recognize. With respect, Director, you do not have authority to deny it either. The Xanthari Earth Treaty of Cooperation, Section 17, specifically acknowledges that station personnel will respect local customs when not in direct conflict with Earth Commonwealth law. She turned to Joshua. Unless your laws forbid temporary marriage arrangements? No, Park admitted reluctantly. They don't. Then it is settled. Lyria handed Joshua a small, shimmering object that resembled a brooch. This signifies your status during the trial. It will change color to reflect the progression of the ceremonial period. She nodded to her companions, who produced several more tablets. These contain the necessary information about the rituals and expectations. I suggest you study them carefully. Joshua accepted the materials numbly. When does this trial actually begin? It began the moment acceptance was spoken, Lyria informed him. The first formal event will be the presentation banquet tomorrow evening. She fixed him with a penetrating gaze. I would advise rest. The coming days will be educational. After the Zenthari delegation departed, Park collapsed back into her chair. This is a diplomatic nightmare. I'm sorry, Joshua said miserably. I had no idea. Save it, Park cut him off. What's done is done. Now we need to manage this situation. She leveled a stern look at him. For the next 7 days, you represent not just yourself, but all of humanity. The Zenthari are key allies. Their support could fast-track Earth's petition for full concordant membership by decades. The weight of that responsibility settled on Joshua's shoulders like a lead blanket. What should I do? Learn everything on those tablets. Follow the protocols exactly. Don't improvise. Don't joke. And for the love of all that's holy, don't comment on any more alien body parts. She shook her head. And Ray, try not to fall in love with her. This is still just a diplomatic incident we need to survive. Joshua almost laughed at the absurdity of the warning. Fall in love? With an alien ambassador who was essentially royalty on her world? The idea was preposterous. Then again, 12 hours ago, the idea of accidentally getting alien married had seemed equally impossible. As he left the director's office, the brooch Lyria had given him warmed slightly against his chest. Looking down, he noticed it had changed from silver to a soft blue glow. The trial had officially begun. The 7 days stretched before him like an uncharted galaxy, vast, mysterious, and potentially catastrophic. The formal name is Jirtalik, explained Vale, the stern-faced Zenthari, who had been assigned as Joshua's cultural guide. It translates roughly to Season of Knowing. They stood in Joshua's quarters, standard diplomatic housing that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate for his new status. Vale moved through the space with obvious distaste, his golden ceremonial attire making the prefabricated furnishings look even more utilitarian. Traditionally, Jirtalik lasts for 1 full lunar cycle on our homeworld, Vale continued. But we've adapted the ritual for space stations and colonies. 7 standard days is considered sufficient for modern couples. Joshua was struggling to absorb the massive amount of information being thrown at him. The tablets Lyria had provided contained hundreds of pages of ritual instructions, historical context, and protocol guidelines. And I'm expected to memorize all of this? He asked, gesturing to the sea of information floating above his desk. Vale's expression remained impassive, but his tail twitched in what Joshua was beginning to recognize as restrained irritation. You are expected to honor our traditions to the best of your ability. Perfection is not required, but sincere effort is. Joshua rubbed his eyes. He'd been awake for nearly 20 hours straight, and the adrenaline of his diplomatic disaster was wearing off. What's the first event again? The presentation banquet, Vale replied. It begins in 6 hours. You will be formally introduced to the station's dignitaries as the matriarch's provisional bondmate. He gestured to a package that had been delivered earlier. Your ceremonial attire has been provided. Joshua eyed the package warily. Traditional Zenthari clothing? Modified for human physiology, Vale confirmed. We are not unreasonable. Joshua wanted to argue with that assessment, but exhaustion was clouding his judgment. I should probably get some sleep before this banquet. A wise decision, Vale agreed, moving toward the door. I will return in 5 hours to assist with your preparation. He paused, studying Joshua with an unreadable expression. May I offer some advice, human? Please. The matriarch did not need to accept your accidental proposal. She chose to. Remember that. Before Joshua could ask what that meant, Vale was gone, leaving him alone with his thoughts and several hundred pages of alien marriage customs. Sleep proved elusive despite his exhaustion. Joshua's mind raced with questions. Why had Ambassador Kira accepted his accidental proposal? What were the political implications? Who was this Tyreek faction that had objected so strongly? And, perhaps most pressingly, how was he going to survive 7 days of pretending to be married to one of the most powerful aliens in the sector? When his alarm chimed, he felt like he'd barely closed his eyes. Groaning, he sat up and eyed the ceremonial clothing package. Might as well see what his alien wedding outfit looked like. To his relief, the attire was relatively conservative by Xanthari standards. The base layer resembled a tailored suit, though made from a material that seemed to shift subtly between deep blue and purple depending on the light. Over this went a ceremonial vest with intricate silver embroidery that matched the patterns on the brooch Lyria had given him. The outfit lacked the trailing scarves and elaborate accessories that characterized traditional Xanthari formal wear, accommodations for his human body and dignity. Vale returned precisely on schedule, accompanied by 2 assistants carrying various implements that Joshua couldn't identify. The next hour passed in a blur of preparations, ceremonial cleansing, thankfully just his hands and face. Application of symbolic markings, temporary, Vale assured him, and a crash course in Xanthari formal greetings. The matriarch will meet you at the entrance to the Great Hall, Vale explained, as they made their way through the station's corridors. You will process in together. Speak only when spoken to for the first portion of the evening. Joshua nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. His new attire fit perfectly, but felt foreign against his skin. The translator behind his ear had been upgraded to a more sophisticated model that included cultural context indicators, small tonal cues that would help him understand the nuances of Xanthari communication. They arrived at an elaborately decorated antechamber. Floating light sculptures created patterns that reminded Joshua of Earth's aurora borealis, while subtle perfumes hinted at exotic flowers. And there she was. Ambassador Kira stood beside a reflecting pool, her ceremonial attire taking Joshua's breath away. The silver fabric of her gown seemed almost liquid, flowing around her tall frame like water captured in zero gravity. The circlet she'd worn at the reception had been replaced by a more elaborate headpiece with cascading blue stones that matched her eyes. Her tail, the unwitting catalyst of their situation, was adorned with intricate silver rings, connected by delicate chains. She turned as they entered, and for a brief moment, Joshua thought he detected uncertainty in her expression. Then, her diplomatic mask slipped into place. Joshua Ray, she greeted him formally. You look appropriate. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or merely an observation. Thank you, Ambassador. You look stunning. He hesitated, then added, I mean that respectfully. Of course. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. Given our current circumstances, I believe some compliments are permitted. Vale cleared his throat. The guests await. Matriarch. Kira nodded, then extended her arm in a formal gesture. Shall we? Joshua carefully placed his hand in the position Vale had taught him, not quite touching her skin, but close enough to indicate connection. Together, they approached the massive doors leading to the Great Hall. Before we enter, Kira said quietly, I should inform you that tonight's gathering includes representatives from all major political factions on Xanthar Prime. Including the Tyreek faction? Joshua asked. Surprise flickered across her face. You've been studying. I've been trying. She nodded approvingly. Yes, Counselor Thurk and his associates will be present. They may attempt to test your knowledge of our ways. To embarrass me? To invalidate the trial, she corrected. If you commit a serious enough cultural transgression, they could petition for immediate dissolution. Joshua's stomach tightened. No pressure. Just follow my lead, Kira advised as the doors began to open. And remember, among my people, sincerity is valued above perfection. The Great Hall of Zenthar Prime was a marvel of alien architecture. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above them, composed entirely of transparent crystal that revealed the star-filled void of space. The walls were lined with growing plants from dozens of worlds, creating a living tapestry of colors and textures. In the center, a massive table formed a perfect circle, with no head or foot to establish hierarchy, a Zenthari tradition that emphasized the equality of all voices in diplomatic discourse. As they entered, a subtle chime sounded, drawing all eyes to them. Joshua estimated at least 100 delegates were present, representing not just the Zenthari, but various allied species as well. Director Park stood with the small Earth delegation, her expression professionally neutral despite the circumstances. A Zenthari official stepped forward, raising an ornate staff. Honored guests, I present Matriarch Kira, High Ambassador of the Zenthari Conclave, and her provisional bondmate, Joshua Ray of Earth. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Joshua forced himself to stand tall, keeping his position beside Kira exactly as Vale had instructed. The first hour of the banquet passed in a blur of introductions and formal exchanges. Joshua relied heavily on his enhanced translator, responding with the ceremonial phrases he'd hastily memorized. To his relief, most delegates seemed more curious than hostile, though he noted several Zenthari watching him with undisguised skepticism. You're doing well, Kira murmured during a brief lull. The First Minister of Trade was impressed by your knowledge of the traditional greeting. I had an intensive crash course, Joshua admitted, though I'm still not sure I'm pronouncing anything correctly. Your accent is atrocious, she confirmed, but with a hint of amusement. However, the effort is acknowledged and appreciated. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Counselor Thurk, flanked by two other Zenthari, whose elaborate gold facial markings identified them as members of the Tyreek faction. Matriarch. Thurk inclined his head in a gesture that somehow managed to be simultaneously respectful and dismissive. Your human appears to be adapting to our customs. How quaint. Joshua bristled at being discussed in the third person, but remembered Vale's warning about maintaining composure. Kira's posture subtly shifted, her tail lifting to a position that radiated authority. Counselor Thurk, allow me to properly introduce my provisional bondmate, Joshua Ray. This is Counselor Thurk, High Representative of the Tyreek faction. Joshua executed the formal bow he'd practiced. Honor to your house and lineage, Counselor. Thurk's eyes narrowed. You've taught him our phrases, like training a pet to perform tricks. Joshua felt a surge of anger, but controlled it. Actually, Counselor, I'm quite capable of learning on my own. Though I admit, Zenthari cultural nuances are complex. Too complex for humans, perhaps. One of Thurk's companions suggested, Your species has barely mastered interstellar travel. How could you possibly understand the depths of bond rituals that evolved over 10,000 years? I don't claim to understand everything, Joshua replied carefully. That's the purpose of the trial of intent, isn't it? To learn. Thurk made a dismissive gesture. A charitable interpretation. Others might suggest the trial exists to provide an honorable exit from mistakes. The emphasis on the last word made his meaning clear. Before Joshua could respond, Kira intervened. The origins and purposes of our traditions are well documented in the historical archives. Counselor, should you wish to refresh your knowledge, I would be happy to arrange access. Her tone was perfectly polite, but even Joshua could detect the subtle rebuke. Thurk's face darkened slightly. Your commitment to education is admirable, matriarch. I wonder, though, does your human understand the political implications of this arrangement? I understand enough, Joshua said, deciding to take a risk. I know that the Zenthari value honesty and directness. So let me be direct. If you have concerns about my presence here, I'd prefer you address them to me rather than discussing me as if I weren't present. A hush fell over their immediate vicinity. Thurk's companions exchanged glances, while Kira's tail twitched in what might have been surprise or concern. For a long moment, Thurk stared at Joshua, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, sharp sound. Perhaps there is more to you than appearances suggest. Human. He turned to Kira. Your taste remains unpredictable, matriarch. I look forward to observing how this trial unfolds. With that, he and his companions moved away, leaving Joshua with the distinct impression he'd just survived some kind of test. That was either very brave or very foolish, Kira observed quietly. Which do you think it was? She studied him thoughtfully. I haven't decided yet. Her attention was drawn to a signal from across the room. The ceremonial meal is about to begin. Remember? Use only the utensils you use, in the same order. Joshua recited, and no matter what appears on my plate, express appreciation before tasting. Kira's expression softened. Perhaps you are a quick learner after all. The meal that followed tested Joshua's diplomatic skills more than any technical problem he'd ever faced. Zenthari cuisine was designed for beings with different taste receptors and digestive capabilities. While the chefs had prepared human-compatible versions of the traditional dishes, the appearance remained authentic, meaning Joshua found himself politely consuming foods that resembled everything from pulsating fungi to what looked disturbingly like living crystals. Throughout the meal, he was acutely aware of being observed from all sides. Director Park watched with barely concealed anxiety. The Tyreek faction representatives monitored his every move, seemingly waiting for a cultural misstep. And Kira herself kept glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Her expression a mixture of curiosity and something he couldn't quite identify. By the time the final course was cleared, Joshua was exhausted from the constant tension. The formal portion of the evening was concluding, transitioning to a more relaxed reception, where delegates mingled freely. You've survived the first hurdle, Kira noted, as they moved toward one of the hall's quieter alcoves. Barely, Joshua admitted. I'm pretty sure I used the wrong ceremonial phrase for the third course. You did, she confirmed. But it was a minor error, easily attributed to your human tongue's limitations with our language. She paused, studying him. You handled Thurk better than many seasoned diplomats. I just spoke honestly. Precisely. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. Honesty is refreshing in diplomatic circles. Before he could respond, Director Park approached, her professional smile firmly in place. Ambassador Kira, might I borrow your bondmate for a moment? Earth business. Kira inclined her head gracefully. Of course, Director. The ceremonial obligations for this evening are fulfilled. She turned to Joshua. Rest well. Tomorrow's activities begin earlier. As she glided away to speak with other delegates, Park led Joshua to a private corner. Assessment, she demanded without preamble. Joshua sighed. I didn't spill anything, insult anyone's ancestry, or trigger an interstellar incident. Beyond that, I'm not sure. The Zenthari delegates seemed impressed, Park admitted reluctantly. Especially after your exchange with Counselor Thurk. That could have backfired spectacularly. It was instinct, Joshua said. He was trying to provoke me by treating me as inferior. Park nodded. The Tyreek faction is notoriously xenophobic. They believe Xanthari culture is being diluted through contact with other species. She lowered her voice. There's more at stake here than a cultural misunderstanding. Ray, Ambassador Kira represents the progressive faction that supports Earth's petition for concordant membership. Thurk and his allies oppose it. Joshua's eyes widened as understanding dawned. So this accidental marriage is political? Everything at this level is political, Park replied grimly. Which is why you need to be extremely careful. One mistake could undermine years of diplomatic work. No pressure, Joshua muttered for the second time that night. Park's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, you did well tonight. Better than I expected. She straightened her uniform. Get some rest. I've been informed that tomorrow includes something called a ritual of shared purpose. Whatever that is. As Joshua made his way back to his quarters, he found himself wondering what Ambassador Kira, no, just Kira now, given their supposed relationship, really thought about this situation. Had she accepted his accidental proposal purely for political reasons? Was she merely enduring this trial to maintain diplomatic relations? Or was there something more to her decision? Something in her quick acceptance and moments of apparent sincerity that hinted at deeper motivations. The brooch on his chest had changed color again, shifting from blue to a deeper indigo. 1 day down, 6 to go. The ritual of shared purpose is fundamentally about understanding, Vale explained, as he led Joshua through a section of the station he'd never visited before. Provisional bondmates must demonstrate compatible goals and values. Joshua adjusted the collar of his ceremonial attire, slightly less formal than the previous nights, but still elaborate by his standards. And how exactly do we demonstrate that? Through the mind resonance chamber? Joshua stopped walking. The what? Vale's expression remained impassive, but his tail twitched in what Joshua was beginning to recognize as amusement. It is not as invasive as it sounds. The chamber creates a psychic field that allows surface thoughts and emotions to be translated into visual metaphors. It is difficult to explain to non-psychic species. Humans aren't psychic, Joshua pointed out unnecessarily. Indeed, which is why you will be provided with a neural interface to facilitate the connection. Vale resumed walking. The matriarch awaits us. They arrived at a circular chamber whose walls were lined with a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. In the center stood a platform surrounded by gently pulsing blue energy fields. Kira was already present, speaking quietly with Elder Lyria. She turned as they entered, and Joshua was struck again by how her formal attire complemented her natural grace. Today she wore robes in deep purple with silver accents that matched the ceremonial rings on her tail. Joshua, she greeted him with a slight bow. I trust you rested well? As well as could be expected, he replied honestly. This whole situation is disorienting. Understandable. Her expression softened momentarily. The ritual of shared purpose can be challenging even for Xanthari couples who enter it willingly. Elder Lyria approached, her ancient eyes studying Joshua. The chamber has been calibrated to accommodate your human neurology. Technical specialist Ray, however, you should be prepared for some discomfort. Discomfort? Joshua echoed. Your species lacks natural psychic barriers, Lyria explained. The interface will create artificial ones, but the sensation may be unfamiliar. Joshua looked at the pulsing energy field with growing apprehension. What exactly happens in there? The field will synchronize with both your minds, creating a shared psychic space, Lyria said. There, you will each present your core values and purposes. The ritual is considered successful when at least 3 compatible elements are identified. And if we don't find 3 compatible elements? Kira answered, her voice carefully neutral. Then the trial of intent would likely be terminated early, as fundamental incompatibility would be established. Joshua realized this was more than just another ceremonial hoop to jump through. It was a genuine test that could end their arrangement. Given Director Park's warnings about the political implications, failure wasn't an option. "I'm ready," he said with more confidence than he felt. Lyria nodded and gestured to the platform. "Remove your footwear and stand facing each other. One hand extended palm up, the other palm down." Joshua complied, stepping onto the cool surface of the platform in his stocking feet. Kira took her position opposite him, her expression serene but focused. Following her example, Joshua extended his right hand palm up, his left palm down. "When your hands meet," Lyria instructed, "the resonance field will activate. Do not resist the connection. This can cause neural feedback that is unpleasant." Joshua swallowed hard. "No pressure." A flicker of amusement crossed Kira's face. "This is your favorite expression, I believe." "Only in terrifying situations," he admitted. "Place your hands together now," Lyria directed. Joshua's palm met Kira's, warm skin against cool. The moment their hands connected, the energy field intensified, changing from blue to a bright violet that surrounded them completely. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming, like plunging into an ocean of another's consciousness. Joshua gasped as foreign thoughts and emotions washed over him, not as words or distinct ideas, but as impressions, colors, and sensations. "Breathe," he heard Kira's voice, though her lips hadn't moved. "Don't fight it." Joshua forced himself to relax, allowing the strange psychic current to flow through him rather than against him. Gradually, the chaotic rush of sensations began to coalesce into something more structured, a mental landscape where abstract concepts took symbolic form. Around them, the energy field projected these symbols as swirling patterns of light and color, visible to the observers outside. But within the shared mental space, Joshua and Kira experienced them as fully formed environments. A vast library materialized, Kira's representation of knowledge and wisdom as fundamental values. Beside it, Joshua's mind contributed a complex network of interconnected communication systems, symbolizing his belief in the importance of connection and understanding. "Interesting," Kira's voice echoed in the shared space. "Your mind values connections between individuals as much as mine values the preservation of knowledge." "They're related," Joshua replied, fascinated by how naturally this mental conversation flowed. Connection enables knowledge to spread and grow. The symbolic landscape shifted, responding to their exchange. The library and communication network began to merge, creating a new symbol that represented the compatible values they'd identified. "First compatibility established," Lyria's voice announced from outside their shared consciousness. The scene changed. Now they stood in what appeared to be a formal Zenthari council chamber, representing Kira's dedication to governance and collective welfare. Parallel to this, Joshua's mind generated images of Earth's global communications grid, the infrastructure he'd helped maintain to connect isolated communities. "You see governance as service," Kira observed, surprise evident in her mental voice. "Not power." "Isn't that what it should be?" Joshua's consciousness responded. "Using your skills to help others?" Another merged symbol formed, public service expressed through different methods, but shared intent. "Second compatibility established," Lyria confirmed. The final transition brought them to more personal territory. Kira's mind revealed a solitary mountain peak, representing her self-imposed isolation as a leader, the necessary distance she maintained even among her own people. Joshua's contribution was unexpected even to himself. A communications technician station, positioned at the periphery of important events, essential but unacknowledged. "You understand loneliness," Kira's mental voice was softer now, tinged with something like wonder. Different kinds of loneliness, Joshua acknowledged. But yes, as these symbols merged, Joshua felt a deeper connection forming, not just conceptual alignment, but emotional resonance. The shared understanding of isolation created a bridge between them that felt surprisingly intimate. Third compatibility established, Lyria announced. The ritual is complete. The energy field began to dissipate, gently separating their consciousness. As Joshua returned fully to his physical senses, he found himself still standing on the platform, hands connected with Kira's. But the intensity of the psychic link had faded. What remained was a lingering awareness of her, not thoughts or emotions, but a sense of her presence that hadn't been there before. When he opened his eyes, he found Kira already watching him, her expression thoughtful. Slowly, she withdrew her hands from his. That was enlightening, she said quietly. Joshua nodded, struggling to find words for the experience. I didn't expect it to be so intimate, she suggested. Real, he decided. I expected something more ceremonial, less genuine. Elder Lyria approached the platform, her ancient eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The ritual of shared purpose cannot be falsified or performed through mere ceremony. It reveals true compatibility, or its absence. She gestured to the brooch on Joshua's chest, which had shifted to a deeper shade of purple. The bond progresses appropriately. As they left the chamber, Joshua noticed Vale conferring with several other Zenthari officials, their expressions serious. One of them, a representative of the Tyreek faction, appeared particularly displeased. I think your opponents were hoping we'd fail that test, Joshua commented quietly, as he and Kira walked together down the corridor. The Tyreek faction believes interspecies bonds are inherently incompatible, Kira explained. Our success challenges their fundamental ideology. So they'll try something else to invalidate the trial? Kira's tail swished in confirmation. Almost certainly. Counselor Thurk is nothing if not persistent. She glanced at him. You should prepare yourself for more direct challenges. Joshua sighed. And here I thought the mind meld would be the hard part of the day. Oh, that was merely the beginning, Kira informed him, a hint of amusement in her voice. Next is the public acknowledgement ceremony, followed by the ritual feast of intentions. More food that looks like it might crawl off my plate? Kira's laugh was unexpected and musical. Perhaps, though I've instructed the culinary staff to prepare options more compatible with human physiology. She hesitated, then added, Your discomfort was apparent during last night's banquet, despite your diplomatic efforts. Joshua was surprised by this consideration. Thank you. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Kira spoke again. The resonance field revealed something interesting about you, Joshua Ray. What's that? You value authenticity above protocol. She studied him with those violet eyes. A dangerous quality in a diplomat. Good thing I'm just a technician, then, he replied with a small smile. Are you? Kira's tail curled thoughtfully. The resonance doesn't respond to surface identities or temporary roles. It reflects core values. She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. You navigate political waters with surprising skill for someone who claims to be just a technician. Joshua felt suddenly exposed, as if the psychic connection had revealed more than he intended. I'm adaptable. It's a useful trait in my line of work. Kira seemed about to press further when Vale approached, his expression urgent. Matriarch, the Tyreek faction has called for a tribunal of verification. Kira's posture stiffened immediately. On what grounds? They claim the human's initial statement was made under the influence of intoxicants, invalidating the proposal. Joshua's stomach sank. The wine at the reception, he realized. They're not entirely wrong. I had drunk a few glasses. How convenient for them to discover this concern now. Kira's voice was cool with controlled anger. When did they file the petition? Immediately following your successful ritual of shared purpose, Vale confirmed. Of course. Kira's tail lashed once, a rare display of genuine emotion. When does the tribunal convene? In 2 hours. The ritual judge has granted their request for expedited proceedings. Kira turned to Joshua, her diplomatic mask firmly back in place. It seems our opponents have escalated more quickly than anticipated. Are you prepared to defend our arrangement before a formal tribunal? Joshua thought of Director Park's warnings about the political implications, of the strange connection he'd just experienced with Kira in the resonance field, of the increasingly complex web of alien politics he'd stumbled into with a single careless comment. I'll need a crash course in Zenthari legal proceedings, he said. Then we have no time to waste. Kira gestured for him to follow. The Tribunal of Verification is one of our most ancient traditions, and potentially the most dangerous. 2 hours later, Joshua found himself in what could only be described as an alien courtroom. The circular chamber was dominated by a raised dais, where 3 elderly Zenthari, including Elder Lyria, sat in ornate chairs. Arrayed around them in tiered seating were representatives from various political factions, including a significant contingent from the Tyreek faction. Director Park and a small Earth delegation occupied a section near the entrance. Joshua and Kira stood on a platform in the center of the room, facing the judges. They had spent the intervening time in intense preparation, with Kira and Vale explaining the intricacies of Zenthari legal traditions and coaching Joshua on appropriate responses. The tribunal is primarily concerned with truth, not technicalities, Kira had explained. Answer directly and honestly, even if you believe the answer may not favor our position. Now, as Elder Lyria called the proceedings to order with a resonant tone from her ceremonial staff, Joshua tried to project confidence he didn't feel. We convene this tribunal of verification to examine the circumstances surrounding the bond proposal between Matriarch Kira and technical specialist Joshua Ray of Earth. Lyria announced, Counselor Thurk, as petitioner, you may present your concern. Thurk rose from his seat, his elaborate gold facial markings catching the light as he moved to a position opposite Joshua and Kira. Honored judges, the Tyreek faction brings this petition in the interest of cultural integrity, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. We have evidence that the human statement, which Matriarch Kira accepted as a formal bond proposal, was made while he was under the influence of intoxicants. He gestured, and one of his associates activated a holographic display showing footage from the reception. The scene played out in perfect clarity, Joshua speaking with Kira, glass in hand, making the fateful comment about her tail. Service records confirm that technical specialist Ray consumed 3 glasses of Centauri wine prior to this exchange. Thurk continued. Under Zenthari law, proposals made while judgment is impaired by intoxicants are considered invalid. Elder Lyria turned her ancient gaze to Joshua. Technical specialist Ray, do you dispute these facts? Joshua glanced at Kira, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. Honesty above all. I do not dispute that I had consumed alcohol, Joshua stated clearly. However, I was not intoxicated to the point of impaired judgment. Yet you claim your comment was made in ignorance of its cultural significance. Thurk countered smoothly. How is this not impaired judgment? Cultural ignorance and intoxication are not the same thing, Joshua replied. One is a lack of knowledge. The other is a temporary chemical alteration of brain function. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. One of the other judges leaned forward. A distinction worth noting, he acknowledged. However, the law concerns itself with the outcome, rather than the specific cause of impairment. If your judgment was compromised by any means, the proposal could be invalidated. Joshua felt the situation slipping away. Beside him, Kira stepped forward. Honored judges, I would remind the tribunal that the law specifically requires evidence of significant impairment, not merely the presence of intoxicants. Her voice was calm, but authoritative. Furthermore, the trial of intent exists precisely to address situations where full understanding may not have been present at the initial proposal. Thirk's expression hardened. The matriarch argues eloquently, as always. But consider the broader implications. If we allow bond proposals made in ignorance or partial intoxication to stand, what becomes of our sacred traditions? Do they not deserve the full awareness and commitment of all parties? The third judge, who had remained silent until now, spoke. A valid concern, Counselor. Yet our traditions have always valued intent over perfect execution. She turned to Joshua. Technical Specialist Ray, regardless of your state at the time of the proposal, what is your intention now? Do you wish to continue the trial or seek annulment? Joshua realized this was the real question at the heart of the tribunal. Not whether he had been slightly drunk, but whether he was committed to seeing this unexpected arrangement through. He thought of the political implications Director Park had emphasized, of the strange connection he'd experienced with Kira during the ritual of shared purpose, of the subtle shifts in their interactions over the past 2 days. My intention is to honor the commitment I inadvertently made, he stated firmly. I entered the trial in ignorance, but I continue it with full awareness and consent. Elder Lyria's expression remained neutral, but her tail curved in what might have been approval. Matriarch Kira, what is your intention? Kira's response was immediate and clear. I accepted the proposal with full awareness, and I maintain that acceptance now. Lyria nodded. The intentions of both parties are established. She turned to Thurk. Counselor, the law you cite requires evidence of impairment sufficient to prevent rational decision-making. The consumption of 3 glasses of wine over several hours, while not ideal, does not meet this threshold. Furthermore, both parties have affirmed their continued consent to the trial. With respect, Elder, Thurk pressed. The human's cultural ignorance combined with even mild intoxication creates a compounding effect that— The tribunal has heard enough, interrupted the second judge. We will deliberate. The 3 judges activated a privacy field that surrounded their dais, obscuring both sight and sound. The chamber filled with tense murmurs as various factions discussed the proceedings among themselves. How did I do? Joshua whispered to Kira. Surprisingly well, she replied quietly. Your answer regarding intention was perfect. I was just being honest. Precisely. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely, but before he could respond, the privacy field dissipated. Elder Lyria rose, her staff glowing softly. The tribunal has reached its decision. While we acknowledge the Tyreek faction's concern for cultural integrity, we find insufficient evidence of impairment, meeting the legal threshold for invalidation. Furthermore, the affirmed intentions of both parties satisfy the requirements for continued trial. She struck her staff, once against the floor. The petition is denied. The trial of intent will proceed. A mix of reactions swept through the chamber. Approval from some factions. Barely concealed disappointment from the Tyreek representatives. Thurk's face darkened to a deep purple, but he bowed formally to the judges. The Tyreek faction accepts the tribunal's wisdom, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. As the assembly began to disperse, Director Park approached Joshua and Kira. Congratulations on surviving your first Zenthari legal proceeding, she said dryly, though I'm not sure surviving is the right word. You handled yourself remarkably well, Ray. Thank you, Director, Joshua replied, still processing the intense experience. The communication systems on Level 7 have been experiencing intermittent failures, Park continued, her tone shifting to business. Since you're still technically responsible for priority maintenance, I'd appreciate if you could look into it when your marital duties permit. Of course, Joshua agreed. I can check it now, actually. We have a few hours before the next ceremony. Kira nodded. The public acknowledgement isn't scheduled until the evening cycle. I have diplomatic matters to attend to as well. She turned to Joshua. Shall we meet at the central atrium at the 18th hour? I'll be there, he promised. As they parted ways, Joshua was struck by how quickly they'd fallen into a rhythm of cooperation, almost like an actual couple, managing their schedules around shared obligations. The thought was both unsettling and oddly comforting. The communications issue on Level 7 proved to be more complex than anticipated. A recent upgrade to the psychic dampening fields had created interference with the standard communication arrays, a problem that required Joshua to climb through maintenance ducts, recalibrate sensitive equipment, and write several patches of code to harmonize the conflicting systems. He worked with focused intensity, grateful for the familiar technical challenge after days of navigating alien cultural protocols. By the time he'd finished, his formal attire was rumpled and smudged with mechanical lubricant, and he was cutting it close to the scheduled meeting time. Racing back to his quarters, he barely had time for a sonic shower before changing into the ceremonial outfit Vale had left for the evening's events. The public acknowledgement ceremony apparently required more elaborate attire, including what appeared to be a ceremonial sash adorned with Zenthari symbols he couldn't decipher. He arrived at the central atrium exactly on time, slightly out of breath. The space was even more impressive than the Great Hall, a massive open area at the heart of the station where gardens from dozens of worlds grew in carefully maintained environmental bubbles. Above, a transparent dome revealed not just space, but the swirling nebula that surrounded Zenthar Prime, casting everything in a gentle purple glow. Kira was waiting near a fountain whose water flowed in impossible patterns, defying gravity in what must have been a controlled anti-gravity field. Her attire matched the formality of his own, elaborate robes in deep purple and silver, with a matching sash bearing symbols that complemented those on his. "You appear rushed," she observed as he approached. "The communications issue was more complicated than expected," he explained. "Some kind of resonance conflict between the psychic dampeners and the translator network." Kira's expression sharpened with interest. "Were you able to resolve it?" "Yes, though it required some creative recoding. Your systems are incredibly sophisticated. The way they integrate technological and psychic elements is unlike anything we have on Earth." "Perhaps you could explain the solution to me sometime," she suggested, surprising him. "I find the technical aspects of cross-species communication fascinating, though I rarely have time to explore them." "I'd be happy to," Joshua said, oddly pleased by her interest in his work. A chime sounded, indicating the ceremony was about to begin. Kira's expression returned to its diplomatic neutrality. "The public acknowledgement is relatively straightforward," she explained, as they walked toward the center of the atrium, where a crowd had begun to gather. "We will stand before witnesses and formally state our intention to continue the trial. It is primarily symbolic, but important in establishing public recognition of the bond." Joshua nodded, trying to project confidence. By now, news of their unusual situation had spread throughout the station. The assembled crowd was larger than he'd expected, including not just Zenthari, but representatives from various allied species, all curious to witness this unprecedented interspecies bonding. Elder Lyria awaited them on a small raised platform, her ceremonial staff glowing softly. As Joshua and Kira took their positions before her, the crowd fell silent. "We gather to witness the public acknowledgement of Provisional Bondmates Matriarch Kira and Technical Specialist Joshua Ray," Lyria announced, her voice carrying clearly through the atrium. "This declaration, made on the second day of the Trial of Intent, confirms their mutual decision to continue toward potential permanent bonding." She turned to Kira. "Matriarch, speak your acknowledgement." Kira stepped forward, her posture regal. "I, Kira, High Matriarch of the Zenthari Diplomatic Conclave, acknowledge Joshua Ray as my provisional bondmate. I continue this trial with clear mind and open heart, seeking true compatibility and mutual growth. Lyria nodded, then turned to Joshua. Technical Specialist Ray, speak your acknowledgement. Joshua took a deep breath, recalling the formal phrases Vale had taught him. I, Joshua Ray of Earth, acknowledge Kira as my provisional bondmate. I continue this trial with honest intention and willing spirit, seeking understanding and harmony between us. As he spoke the final words, the ceremonial sashes they wore began to glow softly, the symbols illuminating in a pattern that flowed from one sash to the other, a visual representation of their connected status. The acknowledgement is witnessed and recorded, Lyria declared. The trial proceeds to its next phase. She raised her staff, and a gentle chime resonated through the atrium. Let celebration commence. Music began to play, an ethereal melody produced by instruments Joshua couldn't identify. The formal portion of the ceremony complete, the gathering transitioned to a reception similar to those he'd attended previously, though with a more celebratory atmosphere. Well done, Kira said quietly as they moved among the guests. Your pronunciation has improved. I've been practicing, Joshua admitted. Vale has been a demanding teacher. He takes his responsibilities seriously. Kira accepted a crystal flute of shimmering liquid from a passing server. The position of cultural guide is considered highly prestigious. Joshua took a similar drink, though he sipped cautiously, mindful of the tribunal proceedings earlier. He doesn't seem to like me much. Vale is protective of Zenthari traditions. Your presence challenges many of his assumptions. Kira's tail curved thoughtfully, though I believe he is beginning to reassess his position. Before Joshua could respond, they were approached by a group of delegates from an allied species he didn't recognize, bipedal beings with translucent skin through which complex circulatory systems were visible. Matriarch Kira, the foremost delegate, greeted her in accented but understandable English. We offer congratulations on your provisional bond. Thank you, Ambassador Trellix, Kira replied warmly. May I present my bondmate, Joshua Ray. Joshua bowed in the manner he'd been taught was appropriate for Trellix's species. Honor to your congregation and flow. The ambassador's translucent skin flushed with what might have been pleasure. The human speaks our greeting. Most impressive. He turned to Kira. Your bondmate shows remarkable cultural adaptability. Indeed, Kira agreed, a note of genuine pride in her voice that caught Joshua by surprise. He has embraced the challenges of our trial with admirable commitment. The conversation continued, with Joshua finding himself increasingly drawn into discussions of comparative cultural practices. To his surprise, many of the delegates seemed genuinely interested in Earth customs, asking thoughtful questions about human bonding rituals and communication practices. As the evening progressed, Joshua noticed a subtle shift in how the assembled diplomats interacted with him. Where before he had been largely invisible, or at best, an oddity, he was now being treated with a measure of respect. His status as Kira's provisional bondmate had elevated him from background technician to someone worth engaging with. It was during a brief lull in conversations that Joshua spotted Counselor Thurk and several Tyreek representatives huddled in intense discussion with a Zenthari official he didn't recognize. Their expressions and body language suggested disagreement. Trouble, he murmured to Kira, subtly indicating the group. Kira's eyes narrowed slightly. Perhaps. The official with Thurk is Administrator Selvin, who oversees station security protocols. Her tail twitched with concern. An unusual consultation during a ceremonial gathering. Should we be worried? Not immediately, but remain alert. Kira's expression returned to diplomatic neutrality as another group of delegates approached. The Tyreek faction rarely concedes defeat easily. The remainder of the evening passed without incident, though Joshua remained aware of Thurk's group, watching them from a distance. By the time the gathering began to disperse, he was exhausted from the constant vigilance and unfamiliar social demands. "You should rest," Kira advised, as they prepared to depart. "Tomorrow includes the ritual of collaborative purpose, a more practical test of our compatibility." "What does that entail?" Joshua asked, trying not to sound as tired as he felt. "We will be required to work together to solve a series of challenges, some physical, some intellectual, some cultural." Kira's expression softened slightly. "It is traditionally one of the more enjoyable aspects of the trial." "Enjoyable sounds good after today's legal proceedings," Joshua admitted. As they reached the point where their paths would diverge, Kira to the diplomatic quarters, Joshua to his more modest accommodations, they paused awkwardly. "Thank you," Kira said suddenly. "For what?" "For defending our bond before the tribunal. For learning our ways so quickly. For—" She hesitated, her tail curving in what he now recognized as thoughtfulness. "For treating this situation with the respect it deserves, despite its accidental beginning." Joshua was touched by her sincerity. "I made a commitment, even if I didn't realize it at the time. I intend to honor it." Kira studied him, with those violet eyes that seemed to see more than he intended to reveal. There are many who would have sought the easiest exit from such an entanglement. "Would that have been easier?" Joshua asked genuinely. "For either of us?" "No," she admitted after a moment. "It would not." The brooch on Joshua's chest had shifted color again, now glowing a deep blue-violet. Half their time had passed, he realized. 3 days gone, 4 remaining. The thought prompted a strange mix of emotions he wasn't ready to examine. "Good night, Kira," he said softly. "Until tomorrow, Joshua," she replied, his name sounding musical in her accent. As he walked back to his quarters, Joshua found himself wondering how something that had begun as a diplomatic disaster had evolved into whatever this was becoming. Not quite a friendship, not quite a partnership, but something uniquely their own, forged in the strange crucible of alien customs and unexpected connections. The next 3 days passed in a blur of ceremonial obligations, diplomatic functions, and increasingly complex Xanthari rituals. The ritual of collaborative purpose had indeed been more enjoyable than the formal ceremonies, a series of challenges that required Joshua and Kira to combine their different skills and perspectives. To Joshua's surprise, they made an effective team. His technical expertise complemented Kira's diplomatic strategies in unexpected ways. During a challenge involving station communications, he'd quickly identified a solution that allowed her to negotiate with 3 different species simultaneously. In a cultural interpretation test, her guidance helped him navigate subtle nuances that would have otherwise eluded him. Their success in these trials further undermined the Tyreek faction's claims of incompatibility. Though Counselor Thurk continued to observe their progress with obvious disapproval, even he could not deny their demonstrated ability to work together effectively. More significant than their public success, however, was the private understanding developing between them, forced into constant proximity by the demands of the trial. Joshua and Kira had begun to discover genuine common ground beyond the initial compatible values revealed in the resonance chamber. Late one evening, after a particularly demanding diplomatic function, they had retreated to a quiet observation deck overlooking the nebula. There, with the swirling cosmic gases creating a panorama of purple and blue light, they had talked for hours, not about the trial or politics, but about their lives, their worlds, their personal hopes and struggles. Joshua learned that despite her prestigious position, Kira often felt isolated by the demands of leadership. She spoke of her homeworld with a poet's appreciation for its beauty and a diplomat's awareness of its flaws. In turn, he shared stories of Earth, of growing up fascinated by communication systems, of finding his place in a rapidly changing interstellar community. "Do you regret it?" she had asked, as they watched a particularly spectacular energy surge ripple through the nebula. The comment that started all this? Joshua had considered the question carefully. "I regret my ignorance," he finally answered, "but not where it led us." The look she gave him then, surprised, thoughtful, perhaps even pleased, had lingered in his mind long afterward. By the 6th day of the trial, their provisional bond had become the central topic of station gossip. The unprecedented nature of their situation, combined with their evident success in the rituals, had captured the imagination of diplomats and staff alike. Joshua found himself recognized wherever he went, no longer invisible but, instead, the subject of curious glances and whispered conversations. Director Park had summoned him for regular briefings, her initial alarm gradually shifting to cautious approval as the political benefits became apparent. The Zenthari progressive faction, encouraged by Kira's willingness to bond with a human, had accelerated discussions on Earth's Concordat petition. Several previously hesitant species had indicated increased openness to human diplomatic initiatives. "Don't let it go to your head," Park had warned during their most recent meeting. "But your accidental marriage might be the most successful diplomatic maneuver we've stumbled into in decades." Now, on the morning of the 7th day, the final day of the trial, Joshua prepared for the culminating ritual, the mutual intention ceremony. According to Vale, this was the most significant event of the entire process, where both parties would publicly declare their decision to either formalize the bond permanently or dissolve it honorably. The ceremonial attire for this occasion was the most elaborate yet, a full Zenthari formal ensemble that had been carefully modified for human physiology. As Joshua struggled with the intricate fastenings, a notification chimed on his communication panel. "Priority message from maintenance control." The system announced, "Communications disruption detected in agricultural ring. Technical specialist assistance requested." Joshua frowned. The agricultural ring was vital to the station's self-sufficiency, supplying fresh food for the thousands of beings who called Zenthar Prime home. A communications disruption there could affect environmental controls, potentially threatening entire crop systems. "Timing," he muttered, glancing at the chronometer. The mutual intention ceremony wasn't scheduled for several hours, but protocol required extensive preparation. Still, a critical system failure couldn't be ignored. He activated his communication implant. "Ray to maintenance control. I'm receiving your alert. What's the nature of the disruption?" "Multiple system failures in Sector 8, responded the controller, their voice tight with stress. "Environmental regulations, nutrient distribution, harvesting automation, all dropping offline in sequence. We need someone who understands both our systems and Earth protocols. The integration nodes are showing errors in the translation matrices." Joshua sighed. This was precisely his specialty, the reason he'd been assigned to Zenthar Prime in the first place. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Send the diagnostic reports to my portable terminal." He quickly sent messages to both Vale and Kira, explaining the situation. Vale's response was immediate and predictably stern. "The mutual intention ceremony cannot be delayed. It is synchronized with specific astronomical alignments, significant to our traditions." Kira's reply came moments later. "Address the technical emergency. I will speak with Elder Lyria about adjustments to the preparation schedule." Relieved but still concerned about timing, Joshua grabbed his technical kit and headed for the agricultural ring. When he arrived, the situation was worse than reported. Not just communications, but entire environmental systems were failing across multiple sectors. Technicians from various species worked frantically to contain the cascading failures. But the integration points between different technological systems, precisely Joshua's expertise, were proving the most problematic. "It's as if someone deliberately targeted the connection protocols," muttered a Zenthari engineer as they examined a particularly complex junction point. "These failures aren't random. They're sequential and methodical. Joshua's suspicions rose immediately. Can you show me the failure pattern? The engineer displayed a holographic map of the affected systems. The progression was indeed systematic, each failure triggering the next in a carefully calculated sequence, designed to overwhelm backup systems before they could fully activate. This is sabotage, Joshua concluded grimly. And sophisticated sabotage at that? Whoever did this understands both Xanthari and Earth communication protocols intimately. The realization sent a chill through him. Given recent events and the political tensions surrounding his bond with Kira, the timing seemed far from coincidental. We need to isolate the affected systems and rebuild the integration nodes from scratch, he decided. But first, let's establish a containment perimeter to prevent further spread. For the next several hours, Joshua worked intensely, directing teams of technicians to implement his solutions. The work was challenging, but familiar, a welcome contrast to the unfamiliar cultural territory he'd been navigating for days. Here, in the realm of technical systems, he knew exactly what to do. As they gradually brought systems back online, Joshua's communication implant chimed with an incoming message. It was Kira. Joshua, the ceremony begins in 1 hour. Where are you? He glanced at the chronometer and cursed under his breath. He'd lost track of time entirely. Still in the agricultural ring, he replied. We've contained the damage, but complete restoration will take more time. Can you delegate the remaining work? Your presence at the ceremony is required. Joshua looked around at the teams of technicians implementing his protocols. They were competent, certainly, but the integration points were still unstable. I need at least 30 more minutes, he decided. Then I can hand off the final restorations. The critical systems are nearly secure. Understood. I will inform Elder Lyria. Kira paused, then added, We have received intelligence that the disruption may have been orchestrated by elements sympathetic to the Tyreek faction. I suspected as much, Joshua confirmed. The attack specifically targeted integration points between Xanthari and Earth technologies. Symbolic, given our situation. Indeed, Kira's voice hardened. Counselor Thurk has been notably absent from the station for the past 12 hours. An investigation is underway. Joshua worked with renewed urgency, aware that more than agricultural systems might be at stake. If the Tyreek faction was willing to sabotage station infrastructure to make a political point, what else might they attempt to disrupt the final ceremony? With 10 minutes to spare, he handed control to the senior engineering team and raced back to his quarters. The ceremonial attire awaited, but he had no time for the full preparation ritual Vale had described. Hastily cleaning himself and donning the elaborate garments as best he could, he headed directly to the Great Hall, where the ceremony would take place. The space had been transformed for the occasion. The transparent ceiling now focused the light of the nebula into specific patterns across the floor. Hundreds of floating illumination spheres created a path to the central platform where Elder Lyria awaited. The assembled crowd was the largest yet. It seemed every diplomat and official on the station was present for this culminating event. Joshua spotted Kira standing near the entrance, her expression a careful mask that, nonetheless, couldn't quite hide her relief at his arrival. Her ceremonial attire was breathtaking, flowing robes of deepest purple, embellished with silver patterns that seemed to move like water when she did, crowned by an elaborate headdress that framed her face with glowing stones. "You're here," she said simply as he approached. "Sorry for cutting it so close," he replied, still slightly out of breath. "The sabotage was more extensive than we initially thought." Kira's eyes narrowed. "Were you successful in restoring the systems?" "The critical functions are back online. The agricultural crops are safe." He straightened his attire self-consciously. "I didn't have time for the full preparation ritual. Vale will probably be scandalized." "Vale will survive," Kira said dryly. She reached out, making a small adjustment to his collar with practiced ease. The essence of the ceremony lies in intention, not perfect execution. A subtle chime sounded, signaling the beginning of the proceedings. Kira stepped back, assuming her formal posture. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Joshua took a deep breath, suddenly acutely aware of the significance of this moment. For 7 days, they had navigated this unexpected bond, moving from confusion to cooperation to something that increasingly felt like genuine connection. Now, they stood at the threshold of decision. Though the political implications remained important, Joshua realized his answer was based on something more personal, more authentic. "I'm ready," he confirmed. Together, they walked the illuminated path to the central platform where Elder Lyria awaited. The crowd fell silent as they took their positions, facing each other, as they had in the resonance chamber days earlier. "We gather to witness the culmination of the trial of intent," Lyria announced, her ancient voice carrying clearly through the hall. "For 7 days, Matriarch Kira and technical specialist Joshua Ray have honored our traditions, demonstrated compatibility, and explored the potential of their bond. Now comes the moment of mutual intention, the free and honest declaration of their chosen path forward." She turned to Kira. "Matriarch, speak your intention first, as the one who accepted the initial proposal." Kira stood tall, her violet eyes fixed on Joshua's. 7 days ago, I accepted a proposal spoken in ignorance but delivered with sincerity. I did so for many reasons, some diplomatic, some traditional, some personal." Her voice softened slightly on the last word. "What began as an accident has revealed unexpected truths. I have discovered in Joshua Ray a partner of intelligence, adaptability, and genuine honor." She paused, and Joshua was struck by the open emotion in her expression, something he had rarely seen break through her diplomatic reserve. "My intention," Kira continued, "is to continue our bond beyond this trial, to formalize a partnership that bridges not just our two beings, but our two worlds. In Joshua, I have found complementary strength, mutual respect, and the potential for true connection. I choose to transform what began in misunderstanding into a bond of purpose, and perhaps in time, of deeper feeling." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Surprise, approval, and in some quarters, clear dismay. Joshua stood frozen, processing her words. She was choosing to continue the bond, not just for political reasons, but for personal ones as well. The realization sent a strange warmth through him. Elder Lyria nodded, then turned to Joshua. "Technical Specialist Ray, speak your intention now, as the one who offered the initial proposal." Joshua took a deep breath, suddenly aware that what had begun as a diplomatic disaster had evolved into something far more significant than he could have imagined. The prepared formal response Vale had given him seemed inadequate for what he now wanted to express. 7 days ago, I spoke words I didn't understand, triggering traditions I didn't know existed," he began, choosing his own path. "I entered this trial confused and concerned, focused only on avoiding diplomatic incident. What I didn't expect was to discover in Kira a person of such depth, wisdom, and unexpected warmth." He saw surprise flicker in her eyes at his deviation from the script, but continued with growing confidence. "These 7 days have taught me more than Zenthari customs. They've shown me the power of connection across differences, the value of traditions I once found foreign, and most importantly, the possibility of finding common ground where none seemed to exist." He smiled slightly. "In technical terms, we've achieved an integration far more successful than any communication system I've ever designed." A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the crowd, breaking some of the ceremony's tension. "My intention," Joshua continued, his voice strengthening, "is to honor what we've built together by continuing this bond, not from obligation or political advantage, but from genuine respect and growing affection. The last words felt both dangerous and absolutely right. I choose to transform my accidental proposal into a deliberate choice, to partner with Kira in whatever challenges and opportunities lie ahead. As he finished speaking, something extraordinary happened. The brooch on his chest, which had been changing colors throughout the trial, began to glow with an intense violet light that matched the stones in Kira's headdress. Simultaneously, the illumination spheres surrounding the platform brightened, creating a pattern of light that flowed between him and Kira like a visible manifestation of their connection. Elder Lyria's expression remained serene, but her tail curved in evident satisfaction. The declarations have been made and witnessed. The resonance field confirms the authenticity of both intentions. She raised her staff, which now glowed with the same violet light. There remains one final element of the trial, the psychic resonance confirmation. At her gesture, the floor beneath them illuminated, creating a circle of light that surrounded both Joshua and Kira. Unlike the previous resonance experience, this field did not require physical contact. Instead, it seemed to evaluate them independently, scanning for alignment. This final test cannot be influenced by political considerations or diplomatic necessity, Lyria explained, for the benefit of the non-Zenthari observers. It measures only the genuine compatibility of the participants, a safeguard against bonds formed purely for advantage rather than authentic connection. Joshua felt a gentle tingling sensation as the field analyzed him. Unlike the previous resonance experience, there was no sharing of thoughts or emotions, just a sense of being thoroughly evaluated at some fundamental level. For several tense moments, the field pulsed around them, its color shifting subtly as the analysis continued. Joshua noticed Counselor Thurk watching from the front row, his expression taut with anticipation, clearly hoping for failure at this final hurdle. Then, with a surge of brightness that momentarily dazzled the entire hall, the resonance field stabilized into a perfect violet glow that encompassed both Joshua and Kira in a single, unified aura. The resonance confirms compatibility beyond standard parameters, Lyria announced, genuine surprise evident in her voice. The bond between matriarch Kira and technical specialist Joshua Ray is declared valid and recognized under all Zenthari traditions. She struck her staff against the floor with finality. What began an accident has been transformed by intention. The trial is complete. The hall erupted in applause and exclamations, mostly positive, though Joshua noticed the Tyreek contingent withdrawing in evident displeasure. Director Park caught his eye from across the room, giving him a small nod that somehow conveyed both congratulations and a reminder of the diplomatic significance of what had just occurred. As the resonance field gradually faded, Kira stepped closer to Joshua, her expression soft with emotion rarely displayed in public. "That was not the traditional response," she murmured, referring to his unscripted declaration. "I thought honesty was more important than protocol," he replied. "Was I wrong?" "No," she admitted, her tail curving in what he now recognized as pleasure. "You were perfectly right, as the resonance confirmed." "What happens now?" Joshua asked, suddenly aware that they had moved beyond the structured framework of the trial into uncharted territory. Before Kira could respond, an urgent chime sounded throughout the hall, the station's emergency alert system. A voice echoed from hidden speakers. "Critical systems failure detected in Agricultural Ring Sector 12. Environmental containment breach imminent. All technical personnel report to emergency stations." Joshua's eyes met Kira's, understanding passing between them instantly. The sabotage. It wasn't fully contained. "Go," she said without hesitation. "I will coordinate from the diplomatic command center." As Joshua rushed from the hall, followed by other technical staff, he heard Elder Lyria addressing the remaining assembly. The celebration will be postponed until station security is assured. All delegates, please return to your quarters until further notice. The second wave of sabotage was more severe than the first, a delayed action program that had remained dormant until triggered by specific system restorations. Joshua found himself working alongside engineers from a dozen species, all racing to prevent a cascade failure that could potentially threaten the entire station. "The integration points are completely corrupted," reported a Xanthari engineer, her expression grim. "We need to rebuild them from base protocols." That would take hours, Joshua calculated rapidly. "We don't have that much time before the environmental systems fail completely." He studied the diagnostic displays, mind racing. There had to be a solution, some way to bypass the corrupted integration points without losing critical functionality. "What if we create a parallel communications array?" he suggested suddenly. "Something temporary that bridges the Xanthari and Earth protocols without relying on the standard integration points. That would require intimate knowledge of both systems," the engineer pointed out, "and physical access to the core junction nodes throughout the affected sectors." "I have the knowledge," Joshua asserted. "And I can access the junctions if you can provide a team to implement the patches as I design them." For the next several hours, Joshua worked with intense focus, designing and implementing a makeshift communication system that bypassed the sabotaged integration points. He moved through the agricultural sectors, climbing through maintenance ducts, reprogramming junction nodes, and coordinating with teams of engineers who followed his instructions with increasing confidence as his solutions proved effective. Throughout the crisis, he maintained contact with Kira, who coordinated the broader response from the diplomatic command center. Their partnership, tested through ceremonial rituals, now proved its value in practical crisis management. Kira's diplomatic authority ensured resources flowed where needed, while Joshua's technical expertise addressed the heart of the problem. "We've traced the origin of the sabotage program," Kira reported during one brief communication. "As suspected, it bears signatures associated with the Tyreek faction. Counselor Thurk has been detained for questioning." "Any confession?" Joshua asked, as he recoded a particularly complex junction. "Not yet, but the evidence is compelling." Kira's voice hardened. "They sought to discredit our bond by demonstrating the supposed incompatibility of Xanthari and Earth systems. A rather heavy-handed metaphor." "Not very subtle," Joshua agreed. "And ultimately, self-defeating. The crisis is actually showcasing how well our technologies can work together when properly integrated." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. What had been intended as a dramatic demonstration of incompatibility had instead become a powerful example of successful cooperation, both technological and personal. Finally, after nearly 8 hours of intensive work, the crisis was contained. The agricultural system stabilized, environmental controls restored, and the temporary communications array functioning smoothly. Exhausted, but satisfied, Joshua made his way to the command center where Kira awaited. She looked as tired as he felt, her formal ceremonial attire incongruous in the technical setting of the command room. Yet somehow, she maintained her natural grace and authority even after hours of crisis management. "The station director has issued a formal commendation for your work," she informed him as he entered. "It seems your technical expertise has saved more than our ceremonial bond today." "Our expertise," Joshua corrected gently. The coordination between technical and diplomatic responses made the difference. A small smile touched her lips. "Perhaps our trial of intent proved more practically valuable than anyone anticipated." Around them, the command center gradually emptied as the crisis teams disbanded, leaving them in relative privacy. For a moment, they simply stood together, sharing the quiet satisfaction of crisis averted. "What happens now?" Joshua asked eventually, echoing his question from before the emergency interrupted. Kira's expression turned thoughtful. "Traditionally, following the mutual intention ceremony, Newly confirmed bondmates enter a period of private celebration before public acknowledgement of the formal partnership. And what does private celebration entail? Joshua asked, suddenly aware of how little he knew about Zenthari personal customs, despite days of intensive cultural immersion. That, Kira said with unexpected lightness, is determined by the preferences of the bondmates themselves. It is one of the few aspects of our bonding traditions not governed by formal protocol. That's refreshing, Joshua admitted. Indeed, Kira hesitated, then added more softly. Though in our case, there is an additional option. With the trial complete, either of us could still file for annulment without dishonor. The ceremonial bond would be recognized as fulfilled, but not continued. Joshua studied her, trying to read her true feelings behind the carefully neutral statement. Is that what you want? I meant what I said during the ceremony, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. My intention was genuine, but I would understand if your perspective has changed. Now that the diplomatic necessity has passed, the moment felt pivotal. The difference between a temporary arrangement successfully navigated and something with the potential for genuine significance. Joshua thought about the past 7 days, about the connection that had developed between them, surprising both in its speed and its depth. I meant what I said too, he told her simply. This may have started as an accident, but it's become something I value, something I want to continue exploring. The formal reserve that Kira maintained even in private seemed to soften. Her tail curved in that now familiar expression of pleasure, and her violet eyes brightened. Then perhaps we should begin our private celebration, she suggested, by removing these ceremonial garments and having an actual conversation without protocols or audiences. Joshua laughed, relief and genuine happiness mixing freely. That sounds perfect. 2 days later, Director Park summoned Joshua to her office. He arrived to find her reviewing a series of diplomatic communications, her expression thoughtful. Technical Specialist Ray, she greeted him formally, then allowed her professional mask to slip slightly. Or should I say, consort to the High Matriarch. I'm still not entirely clear on your official title. Neither am I, Joshua admitted, taking the offered seat. The Zenthari have several terms for my position, none of which translate perfectly to English. Well, whatever we call you, your accidental marriage has turned into the most significant diplomatic breakthrough we've had with the Zenthari in decades. Park gestured to the communications display. The progressive faction has gained considerable influence following the exposed sabotage attempt. 3 pending trade agreements have been fast-tracked for approval, and our petition for concordant membership has been moved up for priority consideration. Joshua nodded, aware of these developments through Kira. The Tyreek faction has lost substantial support. Councillor Thurk's involvement in the sabotage, while still not directly proven, has undermined their political position. All of which benefits Earth enormously, Park noted. Which brings me to the purpose of this meeting. She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. Your temporary assignment to Zenthar Prime was scheduled to end next week. Given recent developments, I need to know your intentions. It was a question Joshua had been considering deeply. His technical expertise was still needed on the station, particularly as they rebuilt the damaged systems properly. And then there was Kira. Their formal bond now recognized under both Zenthari tradition and Earth diplomatic protocol. I'd like to request a permanent assignment to Zenthar Prime, he said decisively. Both for professional and personal reasons. Park nodded, unsurprised. I anticipated as much. Your request is approved, with a promotion to Senior Technical Liaison. She smiled slightly. It seems appropriate, given your new connections. Thank you, Director. Don't thank me yet, Park warned. Your new position comes with expanded responsibilities. You'll be officially representing Earth's technical interests in all diplomatic negotiations involving communication systems. That means more formal functions, more political complexity, and definitely more ceremonial attire. Joshua groaned theatrically. And here I thought I was done with alien formal wear. Not even close, Park assured him. In fact, I believe your bondmate has arranged something special for this evening, a formal introduction to the Zenthari Cultural Council. Her expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, Ray, I think you've handled this entire situation remarkably well. What started as a potential disaster has transformed into something genuinely valuable for Earth, for the Zenthari, and apparently for you personally. Sometimes the best connections are the unexpected ones, Joshua replied, thinking of communication systems and relationships alike. Later that evening, as he prepared for yet another formal event, Joshua found himself reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events that had brought him to this point. A careless comment, a cultural misunderstanding, 7 days of trial, and now a future he could never have anticipated. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Kira, dressed not in formal diplomatic attire, but in simpler Zenthari clothing that somehow made her seem more approachable, more real. "I thought we might walk together to the council chambers," she said, entering his quarters with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. "I'd like that." Joshua finished adjusting his new formal attire, a blend of Earth and Zenthari styles that symbolized his unique position. Kira approached, reaching up to straighten his collar in what had become a familiar gesture. "The Cultural Council is eager to meet you properly. Your handling of the sabotage crisis has made quite an impression." "Our handling of it," he corrected gently, catching her hand and holding it for a moment. She smiled, a full, genuine expression that transformed her features and made her violet eyes gleam. "Yes, our handling of it. As with many things, we seem to function better together than apart." "A successful integration," Joshua agreed, using the technical terminology that had become something of a private joke between them. "Indeed." Kira's tail curled in amusement. "Though there are still many protocols to explore and connections to establish, I look forward to it." And he meant it, both the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, both professional and deeply personal. As they left his quarters together, walking side by side through the crystal corridors of Zenthar Prime, Joshua reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just over a week. From invisible technician to diplomatic consort, from solitary specialist to partner in an unprecedented cross-species bond. All because he'd made a joke about a tail. Sometimes he was learning. The most meaningful connections began in the most unexpected ways. As if reading his thoughts, Kira's tail brushed lightly against his hand, a gesture of affection that needed no translation.